Well, somebody who is not shedding any lefty tears, but is a very happy man indeed, is our very own Matt Goodwin, author and academic over there in London. Matt, great to see you. Big smile on your face as we are delighted to report that Reform is now now ahead of the Tories. Wow. Tell us all about it. The polls have Reform, or certain polls have Reform positioned very comfortably ahead of all the other parties. Tell us about it, Matt. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Well, what we're seeing here in Britain is a political revolution. For the first time in British political history, Reform is now ahead of the Tories in every single major opinion poll. It's currently forecast to get close to 200 seats at the next general election. We're seeing something that we haven't really seen in this country since the rise of the Labour Party in the early 20th century, when Labour emerged to replace the Liberals. And I can tell you, I was at a Reform conference today in the northeast of England, in the working class area of County Durham. 1,200 people in the room, energy through the roof. Everybody is now, I think, believing that they're not only going to take down the Tories, but they're going to take down the Labour government as well. So there's something special is happening on these islands.
Well, let's look today in London. There's been a big march. It's basically a pro-Tommy Robinson march, I believe, but basically it does show the point that people are fed up with excessive immigration and so on. There are some pictures coming out of London which are quite amazing. No violence, no aggro, lots of happy, smiling people. Am I reading that correctly, Matt?
Well, I think in my mind, these are two very distinct, very different movements in British politics. I think for people focused on bringing about real-world change through the ballot box, really pushing back against mass, uncontrolled immigration, getting a political system that speaks up for the forgotten majority, fixing our borders, that can only be done through the ballot box. So I think, street demonstrations and protests certainly have their place in any democracy. But fundamentally, this is about changing who governs number 10 Downing Street in the House of Commons. And Reform is really now establishing itself as the only alternative to what we would call the uniparty, left and right, who offer identical policies on all of these big issues.
James.
Matt, I'm really curious, too, about how much the Trump effect has had to do with what's happening in UK politics right now. We're seeing some of it happen in Australia, but I noticed today, and it's a small thing, but also a big thing, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has apparently taken his pronouns out of his Twitter bio. And I feel like there's suddenly a realization that all of the old woke stuff, well, that doesn't fly anymore. And on the left now, they have to drop this virtue signaling if they have any hope of political survival. What's your take?
Well, I'd agree with much of what you say. I mean, I was in Washington for the inauguration. I was at Nigel Farage's party overlooking the White House a couple of days before the inauguration. That was packed with pretty much every major player in British politics except anybody within the Labour government. I mean, it was a real symbol in that it reflected, I think, Nigel Farage's influence as a bridge between America and Britain, but nobody from the Labour government. I think fundamentally what we're seeing is a change in the zeitgeist, in the spirit of the age, and the dominant culture in Western Anglosphere nations. We're beginning to, I think the elite class are beginning to understand, finally, 15 years after they imposed it on the rest of us, that these kind of radically progressive woke beliefs are really only shared by 10 to 15% of these populations. And if they carry on down this road, as we've seen with the Democrats, as we've seen with many centre-left parties across Europe, they're going to end up in the electoral cul-de-sac. And I think it's that realization that they've lost the working class, they've lost the small towns, they've lost the countryside. They're really dependent on the cities and minority voters and, mad woke progressives, but that's not a durable coalition for the next 10, 20 years. Dare I say, maybe some people within the elite class are finally coming to their senses. Maybe.
Maybe. You're an optimist.
Maybe
You're an optimist,
not. I mean, yeah, self-interest is a powerful motivator. But what is the state of US-UK relations right now? We've seen a number of senior Labor ministers have made some unhinged, ugly comments about Donald Trump in the past. We know he doesn't easily forgive and forget. What is the state of that relationship?
Well, on the surface, everybody will tell you that it's still a special relationship, but anybody who's met the key players will also be able to tell you that that's not the case. There is an enormous amount of skepticism within Team Trump over Keir Starmer, the Labour government, Sadiq Khan. Elon Musk has become a symbol of that, tweeting almost daily about how bad the Labour government is, how terribly it's managed issues like the rape gangs, the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs, the clampdown on free speech, which, remember, Americans, and anybody else with common sense really doesn't like. And that's really riled the Americans. But there's also this frustration in Washington. On the one hand, we have the most pro-UK president, pretty much since Reagan. And at the same time, we have a Labour government that's obsessed with getting back into bed with the European Union, a declining bloc in the global economy, overrun with protectionism and economic stagnation, left to right, riddled with political division. So there's a frustration in Washington. These guys are saying, look, let's do a deal. Let's do a big trade deal. Let's get close. Let's work on this relationship. We've got a Labour government that kind of doesn't really know what to do with it, doesn't want to say anything nice about Trump, doesn't want to embrace America. It's sort of paranoid of not alienating Brussels, but Brussels is, Brussels is the past. Trump, I think, is the future. That is the political realignment that the West and the Anglosphere need to pursue.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, you'll be pleased to know that last time Nigel Farage was in Australia, he sat here at this desk in this studio, and I predicted confidently he would be a future Prime Minister of Britain.
Let me just say, yes. When I left him a couple of hours ago, he was in the pub having a pint.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, I know you'll be rushing off to join him, I hope. But can you explain to me this idiocy about a tenth of England's farmland is going to be rewilded to meet climate targets? This is lunacy. Beautiful English countryside, the most beautiful countryside in the world. That lunatic Ed Miliband and Labour are handing 10% of it over to solar farms and rewilding weeds and all this eco-garbage, Matt.
Well, that's exactly what's happening. Ed Miliband is probably the most ideologically extreme minister that we've had on net zero to date. This is when you don't believe in God, you tend to believe in anything, and he's fallen head first into radical net zero-ism. And thankfully, we've had some surveys over the last couple of weeks showing that the British people are actually becoming more skeptical about net zero, particularly the way in which it's piling higher bills on ordinary working people. And we've also seen, frustratingly, new taxes on family farms that have been on these islands for generations. The Labour government's decided it's going to impose inheritance tax on those family farms alongside the net zero regulations, alongside the net zero extra bills, at the same time as that Labour government is giving the same amount of money that it's going to raise by smashing British farms, 500 million, it's giving 500 million to climate initiatives across Africa and South America. So there's a kind of real sense that this Labour government is certainly not on the side of the working man and woman, but it's definitely not on the side of British farming. And that's why we've got more tractors than ever in Westminster protesting almost on a weekly basis. Because I tell you, you won't feel this necessarily in Australia, but there is a political revolution that is about to happen in this country. Everybody can feel it. All the key groups in this coalition, the farmers, the workers, the small towners, the pensioners, they're all utterly fed up with this Labour government, which is why we're seeing these remarkable shifts in the polling.
Well, Matt, I can tell you can see it here in Australia in some of the regions where people are sick of being smashed by renewables projects coming in across their farmland. But, back to your point about these farmers, it seems to me, and I'd love your thoughts on this, that really what is going on here, it's not so much about saving the climate, it's about smashing all of the traditional pillars of Britain, one of which, of course, being farmers, but, also we've seen it with the elderly and, the treatment of them and other sorts of groups, that really this is about not so much about climate, changing the climate, but changing society.
Yeah, I'd go a little bit even further. Our greatest conservative philosopher, Roger Scruton, once called it the culture of repudiation.
Yes.
He said essentially, what you get among the elite class is a culture of repudiation. They repudiate everything that makes those nations distinctive, their history, their identity, their collective memory. He also used the term oikophobia, a sort of hatred of your own people. And I think, in essence, what we've seen, particularly since the 2010s, is a radicalization of the elite class as it's basically turned against its own people. And it's done that because among the elite world, you do win social status by being negative and derogatory about nation states, about the deplorables, about the garbage people, about the loons and the so-called racists and the xenophobes. That's how today's elite class win social status. It's this luxury belief. And Rob Henderson, an academic from Cambridge, had this idea that, 50 years ago, the elite accrued status through money, through wealth and estates, whereas today they've tried unsuccessfully to win social status by looking down on their own people and winning applause from other members of that elite class. And I think that's what's going on. The only problem they've got is the forgotten majority aren't going to go along with it. They're saying, well, look, we love our country, we love our history, we love our culture. We actually, I think it's remarkable to come from these islands. I think it's really great to come from these islands, all the contributions we've made over centuries. We're really proud of this. We're not going to give this up. And that's where they've miscalculated. You see, they control the institutions. They think they can do this top down, but nobody else is going to go along with it.